Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition. How are you doing today, Heather?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, and I'm super excited for us to have a guest join us for this call. We have Sarah Freeman. How are you doing today, Sarah?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear more about your thoughts on last night's school board meeting and the whole conversation around literacy. So, Heather, do you want to just give us a quick recap of what went down at the meeting last night?
Yeah, so last night was the last school board meeting before we go into the new year. It was a committee of the whole meeting, and we learned a little bit about COVID numbers. We had a literacy update with a long question and answer session. The world's best workforce submitted their letter forward for the board to review. And I think, even though we have a lot to digest, that was the bulk of the meeting.
Yeah, there were a couple of officer appointments and that kind of stuff.
Oh, yes. And a new student rep.
And a new student rep, that's right. And student rep Janine's last meeting, which is very sad because he's been a great addition to the board. But excited
Brilliant.
to learn more about this new student. So actually we want to kick it now to Sarah to talk a little bit about our slide of the night. And I think this is really interesting. So Sarah, do you want to take it away and tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, our slide of the night for last night is actually from last month's Committee of the Whole meeting. And the reason I'm focused on this slide specifically and wanted to bring our attention back to it is because letter names and letter sounds are considered two of the most critical foundational skills for building reading proficiency and literacy. And what these data from last month's Committee of the Whole show us is that lots of Minneapolis public schools students, early grade students, are not proficient in these foundational skills yet. My son is one of the students who was not proficient in these skills in kindergarten and first grade. And so I want to bring our attention back to this because what I didn't hear in last night's meeting was an acknowledgement that these data are significant. The racial gaps that exist in these data are persistent and have been there a long time. And I didn't hear last night sort of what the plan is to improve these skills and outcomes in those early grades. So I want to point us back to this slide that Dr. Fearing presented last month, because I think it's a critically important one to keep in mind, and it's sort of central to the organizing and advocacy that we've been doing around literacy.
For sure. And I think that again, when we see some of this data, that it's really easy to be numb to it because it doesn't change, because we aren't forcing it to change. And so I appreciate you bring us back to this slide, because this is heartbreaking and it's never going to be as, I don't know, it's never going to round people up and get people as agitated as some of the images that we see in the news. But this is one of the biggest injustices in our city. And we can't continue to allow Minneapolis public schools to operate and just accept the fact that we have these huge reading gaps in Minneapolis. And so it's not good for the health of our city, honestly. And so, yeah, thank you for calling this slide back up. And I'm excited to hear you talk a little bit more about it during our longer video.
Great.
So wanting to transition a little bit now to our do better moments and our most valuable moments. And so Heather, I'll actually start with you. Which one do you want to do first? Your most valuable moment or your do better moment?
I think we should end on a positive note. So let's do our do betters first.
Okay, sounds good. So what was your do better moment from last night?
Okay, so my do better moment is from Director Jourdain. So in the middle of the Q&A part of the meeting, where the questions were actually getting really intense, and I felt like for the first time starting to get some of the either what we don't know or what we aren't accountable for or what we maybe don't want everybody to see sort of answers or attention. And Director Jourdain, who typically says nothing during most meetings, interrupted another director and said, like, point of order, and it was just a question and answer, didn't explain it. I have no idea what that was about, but I found it to be really frustrating because then he didn't explain why he felt the need to do that. So that was, I just thought that was, for me, a really frustrating part of the meeting. Kenneth, what was your do better moment?
So that was a frustrating point for sure. And just to bring it back to that point, he said that this was going on. And I just found that really weird because there are a lot of conversations at the board that go on, talking about nothing for a very long amount of time. And he never says that. And so all of a sudden, when we're talking about academics and digging into literacy, that's when he calls his point of order. But anyways, I'll digress because I'm reserving my do better moment for Director Inns. I thought there were a lot of moments for Director Inns last night that were poor, honestly. But what really got to me was towards the end of the meeting, he came back around for a second round of questions about the literacy conversation. And he was talking about how tests are culturally biased and, not culturally competent and, racist and all that stuff, all the rhetoric that we hear about testing, which is fine. I don't agree, but that's what he wanted to use his time for. But then his next comment was to introduce the chairs of the World's Best Workforce Committee to talk about their letter. And he stumbled over Makisha Nation's name, which I thought was just so terrible. And then said, oh, that's such a hard name to say. And then simply said the white man's name very easily, very clearly. And so I just thought, how terrible is that? For a white liberal man to be talking about, racism and all of this stuff, and, then to not acknowledge the trouble that it is to mispronounce people's names like that, and specifically her name, someone who he works with pretty closely, I just thought was really, really gross. And I really hope that he gives an apology to Makisha because she did not deserve that. It was really uncomfortable. It made me and my wife's jaw drop when it happened last night. And I just thought it was really disgusting. So that's my do better moment from last night.
Sarah, what was yours?
My do better moment relates to a great question Director Pauly asked specific to the curriculum and sort of the approach behind the benchmark curriculum. And Superintendent Graff is my do better moment. He answered this great question about a specific curriculum's efficacy by sort of dismissing the question and reducing it to, he referred to the philosophical arguments, being sort of cyclical in nature, relative literacy curriculum. And I just want to point out and highlight that there is a lot of science behind the efficacy and approach of various literacy curricula. And the one that MPS uses was actually just deemed non-compliant by the state of Colorado, non-compliant with their law requiring that all students in Colorado receive rich and science-based literacy curriculum. Benchmark was deemed non-compliant. So to reduce that to a philosophical or political argument was my do better moment.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. And thank you, Heather, for making sure that we end on a good note to end the year. So let's hear people's most valuable moments. Sarah, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, so it builds upon one of Director Inns's maybe less valuable moments, but he sort of posed a philosophical question that I think is important about how we balance budget and staffing when it comes to literacy specific needs versus more general ed type needs. And my most valuable moment goes to Dr. Fearing, who took on this question specifically and explicitly and highlighted that things like PE instruction are incredibly valuable, but ultimately their job is to make sure kids learn how to read. And I appreciated her stating that explicitly, because that's something we haven't heard much in our academics discussions, and especially the literacy discussions at the board level.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Heather?
Like, so my most valuable moment goes to Director Caprini. And her question about, like, are we communicating clearly to parents on multiple fronts about how their kids are doing? So do the parents of the students who are not meeting these standards really get communicated with and understand this? And I think that's a great question, because as a parent, and going to parent-teacher conferences, I know that sometimes I leave with having seen a lot of charts and things, and it's 15 minutes and you're going all around. And in some ways, a parent-teacher conference feels a little like what we saw last night. And what I really want to know is, like, what should I do to go home? I want something tactical, something practical, that I can do every night, besides just keep reading to your kids, because that's just like this lofty goal out there that I don't necessarily gets us to where we want to go. So for me, her asking that explicitly, and then the answer was, yeah, it's supposed to happen once a year. That's by law required. I was like, oh, so I don't know that parents, like individual parents of these kiddos that don't know their letters and sounds, really understand what we're not providing for their family. So I thought that her question was fantastic. What was yours, Kenneth?
So mine was building actually off of both of your do better moments, was Director Pauly's line of questioning around literacy last night. I thought it was really strong. It was very clear, very intentional, highly, highly focused on academics and the improvement of academics and understanding like his role in terms of accountability, in terms of our philosophy. You know, it's one thing, it is important to understand what is the district's philosophy, to Sarah, your point around literacy, and is it science-based, is it not, what are we doing? And so I just thought he had a very clear plan, and it was clear that he was agitating some folks, including the superintendent and Director Jourdain, during that line of questioning. And I think that's because he's pushing some really sensitive buttons that we need to push when we look at that data that Sarah shared in Slide of the Night. So my most valuable moment was Director Pauly's line of questioning. So that's it for us for this year in terms of our board recaps. Thank you all for listening. I hope you check out our longer video where you can hear more from Sarah about her literacy work, and as we try to understand more about what happened last night. So check that out if you have some time, and I hope you all have a great end of the year. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.